All right, so welcome back to the Odum Legacy Systems Ecology. This is part two of our interview with Dr. Mark Brown, Professor Emeritus of Environmental Engineering Sciences at the University of Florida, and long-term colleague of Dr. H.T. Odums at the Center for Wetlands and the Center for Environmental Policy. So we're going to pick up where we left off from part one
Yep.
uh, and do a
What
little
I
backtracking. We
Yeah,
realized our memory is better in hindsight. So
yeah. After you get off camera, you start thinking, well, there's all this stuff that we could have covered that we didn't. So I did a little bit of research. I went back through HT's CV, which has all the publications that he has ever done, and it's a very interesting read, by the way. Um, I'm not going to cover all of it, but I do want to start back in 1970. 70, 71, when he arrived in Gainesville, 71, actually, um, and just kind of go through this list. And so the very first thing on my list is the rainforest book called A Tropical Rainforest. And it was Odum and Pigeon in 1970. And the thing has, I forget exactly the total number of chapters, but 21 of the chapters in this book, and the book is about this thick. I should have brought one home. I mean, it's
yeah,
huge. It's incredible. 21 of the chapters. He is co-author or first author on. Oh, I'm sorry. He's first author on 21 chapters and co-author on most of the others. So he had a really big part of that. So the CFW, the Center for Wetland, was founded in 1971. I was there for the founding.
founding.
I helped. Let's see. I graduated with my PhD in 1973. And for 2 years, I bounced around in the Department of Architecture teaching and in working on various projects with HT. And of course, one of them was a Vietnam project, which I think we've already mentioned, but maybe we'll mention it again. Um, but also during that time, he was preparing the proposal for um, the Rockefeller Rand project, the Cypress Dome project, and he needed back then, there was no such thing as PowerPoint there. So he wanted a really large poster that he could carry up to New York and Washington to illustrate sewage coming into a cypress dome. So, and he turned to me. I was the architect slash artist, and he said, can you do a really big one? And I did it on Mylar, painted the back side. So, but the whole idea was he could roll it up and take it on an airplane. But he wanted big, I mean, it was like 4 feet by 3 feet high, because I guess it was a big auditorium and wanted to make sure everybody had it. It floated around the center for a long time. I don't know where it is now, but the important thing is that I drew a dome shape of the trees with small trees on the outside and bigger trees in the center, and that became the logo of the Center for Wetlands
Oh, nice.
over the years. So um, anyway, so it was founded in 1971. That's when he got the big project that was funded by NSF and the Rockefeller Rand uh, uh, or Rockefeller Foundation. So also in 1971, he did a publication with Ariel Lugo and Suzanne Bailey and Sam Snedeker. Sam has since passed away, but Ariel and Suzanne were both interviewed on this podcast called Models for Planning and Research for the South Florida Environmental Study. That was the precursor to the South Florida study, the big thing that everybody worked on and was a carrying capacity for man and nature in South Florida. And that was in 1971. Also in 71, he published Environment, Power, and Society. But that was probably, 5 years or 3 years or so in the making. So he was working on that, I think, when he was in North Carolina. And it was his wife at the time who suggested that he write the book environment, power, and society. And it was, she said, you've got all this stuff going on and people need to really know about it. And so, um, and then in 71, also, he wrote a thing called The Changing Power Basis for Man that was in the Architectural Landscape Architectural Quarterly Review. And it was a review of the September 1971 issue of the Scientific American called Energy and Power. And it was this, the energy and power thing in Scientific American was this, oh, everything is great. There's so much energy and so much power. And, you know, the world is going to be fine. And people were talking about the craziness that would happen with unlimited energy and, you know, everything was going to be neat. And he just blasted it and said it was just malarkey, I think. I don't think he used that word, but that's it. He also, in 71, produced the marine estuarine ecosystems developing with treated sewage wastes. And I think that's where the term ecosystems, oh, darn, now I lost it. The idea that there are emerging new ecosystems associated with man is what he called them. These things that were happening as a result of the interface with humans and in some cases their wastes. And then classification of coastal ecological systems of the United States was also produced at that time. And that classification scheme had in it emerging systems of ecological systems associated with man. 72, he was really into a number of publications on the energy circuit language, and he was really pushing that very strongly in the early 70s. And he used energy diagrams for environmental impacts, chemical cycles with energy circuit models, planning with modeling, and then energy circuit language and energy transformations and asymptotic growth. So that year, those years, 71, 72, he was really pushing the energy circuit language.
So I'm
And
gonna take it. Let's take a. Can we take a little? I'll take a little
sure,
breath here.
yeah, yeah,
Um, I think what's worth noting about this. This is just that was one year,
yeah.
almost 1971, and this shows you. I don't know if this is his peak productivity or not. It'd be interesting to see in terms of just pages and or like if Pat Kangas likes to measure it in pounds of books and pounds of reports. But I mean, just to point out that he was doing this, he's almost always the lead author. I mean, the
Yeah,
collaborators are there, but
yeah.
he's really leading all these publications and books, and he's following up on stuff that he started, 10 years before that. So there's really high productivity, but there's this huge lag, I think,
Mhm.
that's there as well, right? Because all the marine stuff was stuff he was doing in maybe in Texas even, right?
Even in Texas, yeah. And it takes a while, you know, it does take a while, as you well know. I've
Well, I
been
think
working
that's just
on
great
this
because I
stuff.
remember being at the Center for Wetlands. This is 1994, 96, and the self-organization books about the marine, the estuarine ponds
Yeah,
at Morehead City, the first ones. There's a
right.
stack of them, and like he just published that in like I think maybe the late 80s
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
early 80s.
Yeah.
So he,
He would,
he
he would cycle back, you know. I think he would feel guilty that it was never put out. And so he'd cycle back and get this stuff and eventually get it out. You know,
he just knew that you had to produce
yeah,
that was
yeah,
his thing. He was so good at it too, so efficient. Anyway, I just thought we'd take a little break and point that out. Just
sure.
phenomenal.
73 was a seminal paper, Energy, Ecology, and Economics, that was produced, that was printed in Ambio. Very few people really know about that one. And it's a shame because it's an incredible, I think I have it here. I hope I have it here because I wanted to, where did I do
You want to
it?
share your screen or anything?
I will as soon as I find it. Actually, I don't need to, but I do want to just point out a couple of things from it. Desktop. Uh,
Your editor, so you can pause if you want to. I don't know.
yeah, it's okay. I got it.
Yeah.
So the beginning of it was interesting that it was written by somebody else. It says, many are beginning to see the energy, ecology, and economics form a single unified system, states the author, who gives 20 points to explain the energy control of our economy and the relationship to the environment. The net reserves of fossil fuels are mainly unknown, he says, but they are much smaller than the gross reserves, which have been the basis of public discussions and decisions that imply that growth can continue. He offers a general answer to the present world situation where boom and bust economies may soon be forced toward a steady state, rejects economic expansionism, stop growth, use available energies for control, for cultural conservation to steady state, and seek out the condition now that will come anyway. So this was in, what did I say, 1971 or 72?
73. That's the
Uh,
Ambio. You're quoting from the Ambio
MBO. So
paper, right?
it's an incredible article. He's got these 20 things. The true value of energy to society is net energy. So he introduces net energy in 1972. World inflation is driven in part by increasing fraction of our fossil fuels that have to be used in getting more fossil fuels and energy. And then it goes on. I mean, it's got Lotka's principle in there, and it's just it's a really, really good article. And anybody out there, it's on Google Scholar. You can download the article. It's there. JSTOR has it, and I really suggest anybody who's interested in HT and his legacy should have a look at it. I just reread it again and was going, it's apropos to today. Everything he said is exactly what's happening. He said you either can there are ecosystems that make a transition into steady state, and it says, and there's the ones that are crazy and bust.
Yeah.
And that's where we're heading right now. We're going to bust. Anyway, so that was 73. 74, again, he goes back to trying to terminate fallacies in national policy on energy, economics, and environment. And then in 74 was the publication, the end of the project, Models of Herbicide Mangroves and War in Vietnam. And the authors on that are Odum, Maurice Sell, Mark Brown, Jim Zucchetto, Chuck or Charles Swallows, and Joan Browder, Tim Alstrom, and Larry Peterson. He was a faculty member in architecture that also worked with us. 75, Model for Understanding the Relationship of Money, Energy, and Survival Value. And we produced, Odum and I produced Carrying Capacity for Man and Nature in South Florida, the final report to the National Park Service for the big Florida study that had the maps in it and all that kind of stuff.
So that's 74?
75.
75.
Yeah.
That's the famous maps that are still in the Center for Wetlands.
Yeah.
That are very, very large. They're like 6 feet tall or more, aren't they?
Yeah, I think we talked about them a little bit the last time. We painted hypodermic needles, and students were tattooing themselves, not on purpose. I mean, back in that day, tattoos weren't popular as they are now.
Yeah, had a different meaning.
76, he's still really doing mini models, but he starts, and this is where, he's still doing the simulation modeling and the language, but this is where 76, he introduces macroscopic mini models, the concept. And in a paper called Macroscopic Mini Models for the Balance of Man and Nature. There was an NSF workshop in 1976, and Odum often talked about that. He went to that because people were going to try to codify how to do net energy. And they brought in all of the big energy people from all over the country, and it was a workshop at Stanford University in California at the Institute for Energy Studies. And he presented their energy analysis and net energy. But his big point was you can't just do energy, heat energy. You had to do quality, and they just drummed him out of the. I mean, I think he came back. I don't think HT could ever have his tail between his legs, but he came back really upset that they just blackballed him out of this meeting and didn't want to hear anything about energy quality. And I can tell you a story about energy quality. About that same time, we ought to go ahead and do it. A bunch of people, actually, it was a little bit later, but a bunch of guys, physical chemists, and I never did fully understand who the group was, but they were energy people, and they met in Gainesville, and they had asked Odum to come and give a lecture, and he was going to be out of town, and so I had my PhD. So this is after 1980. He said, Brown, you should do this. It'll be good for you. You go in there. So I had no idea what I was walking into, and I walk into this lecture hall. It was a pretty good sized lecture hall, and I'm standing at the back, and they notice that I'm there. And I look around, and it's all these old white-haired guys. They're really old. And I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be interesting. And I got up on stage and I started, and I literally was only maybe 3 sentences into the talk. And I said something about energy quality. And this guy in the back of the conference room jumps up and he starts screaming at me. I mean, literally screaming, quality? What do you mean by quality? Define your terms. And they're just all the rest of them are going, it was like the young guy was being sacrificed to the old guys, the old wolves. So I said, okay, I'll try. And I tried to explain it, and they just kept yelling. I mean, they literally wouldn't let me get a word in edgewise. And I finally just said, okay, you win. And I just picked up at that time, it was transparencies. It was still doing transparencies. And I walked out. I just left. It's just like, I'm not going to do this. They talked. I mean, they beat me down, and
Yeah.
I had my tail between my legs. I'll tell you right now. And I left. Anyway, that was his meeting was in 1976. And at that same year, he and Betty produced Energy Basis for Man and Nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going over to his house. He had that little room out in the back where that was his office. And I had the most interesting smell. I'll never forget that smell. I can't explain it, but it was amazing. It was musty book smell, I guess is
Yeah.
the best way to put it. And a lot of times when I arrive, he and Betty were just finishing up. They were writing this book together, and it was her influence that put so many cartoons in that book.
Mm.
She was really big on trying to make his stuff at a level that was teachable and that people could relate to. So she was always suggesting toning it down and putting cartoons in it. So there's a lot of cartoons in Energy Basis for Man and Nature.
I'm sure she helped with the editing on the terminology and the sentence structure and the
Yeah, yeah.
syntax. Was always
And
hard.
it was somewhere around then. And again, now I'm foggy. He and I were walking over to lunch, and we were talking. It got kind of walking over to the Union to have lunch together, and we got kind of on a personal note. And he may have even asked me, "Do you have a girlfriend?" And I said, "Yeah, sometimes," or something. And he said, well, I'm either going to have to marry her, or we're going to have to not see each other anymore. And I said, what? And he was talking about Betty.
Oh, wow. So when they were, but he married her before they published the book because her name is Odum by the point.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So this is,
So I don't know exactly when
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
conversation, I remembered it. And I was like, I mean, it was a window into a part of him that I'd never seen before.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
He
pretty
always had
interesting.
those little tiny cracks into his
Right.
personality that you
I,
did.
I either got a mirror or I don't want to see her anymore. Uh,
And he
let's
married
see.
her for, and
That was
stayed married for a long
76.
time.
77, energy cost benefit applied to models of power plants in Crystal River. So he was into the starting to publish the results from Crystal River. And another really great paper, and I didn't look to see if it's on the Google Scholar, was in 1977, the ecosystem, energy, and human values in a journal called Zygon. And it was, it should have said ecosystem, energy, and religion, because that's what it was all about. It was all about religion. And it is another cool paper. And I've read it a lot. He's way out there, but the religion people really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's a cool.
77 also with Mike Kemp, Maury Sell, Walt Boynton, and Mel Lehman. They produced energy analysis and the coupling of man and estuaries. And that was, again, part of the Crystal River project. 78, cypress swamps for nutrient removal and recycling, the values of wetlands as domestic ecosystems. So all of that was coming to a close. 79, two things happened. One was he did an energy analysis of the Everglades National Park. And then the big one was Odum, Alexander, Flora Wang, Mark Brown et al. 1979, Energy Basis for the United States. And that was a report. I forget now what funding agency that was for, but it might have been the NRC. 80, energy transformation and the economy of the United States, remarks on the future of ecology. I graduated with my PhD in 1980, and he and Betty took off to New Zealand on sabbatical. And at that time, they did this book called Energy Systems of New Zealand and the Use of Embodied Energy for Evaluating Benefits of International Trade. So now he's starting to talk about international trade and the use of energy, embodied energy. So in the early 80s, it was still embodied energy, but he began to realize that there was a whole bunch of people out there using the term embodied energy that meant something totally different, because they were just taking fuel energy and using it as a way of saying how much energy goes into things. And so then it was the beginning of, I need another name. And so then we had fossil fuel work equivalent, we had all of these names for what eventually became energy. Also, the Florida Institute of Phosphate Research had a significant amount of money for phosphate research. And he jumped on that, and I jumped on it really big. And then for something like 10 years, I funded an incredible number of graduate students on that phosphate money, doing field ecology and research on restoration of drastically altered lands. It was a great bunch of money that really moved everything forward. And it gave me a salary for a long time until I finally got a real salary from the university.
Wow.
In 81, Brown and Odum, research needs for a basic science of the system of humanity and nature. So we had some money. I guess it was NSF money or some left over. And Odum said, why don't we have a conference and bring a bunch of people in, not a gigantic conference, just a working conference. And we'll bring in people that are into interfacing humans and nature. And so we brought in, and I can't remember everybody, but the one that sticks in my mind was Ian McCard, who was the guy who wrote the book Design with Nature, which revolutionized the way people thought about planning and putting people into environments. He had this overlay technique to determine where was the best location for things by stacking up all of the inabilities, and then the areas that were clear that didn't have any major constraints. Those are the places where you could develop. Duh, you know.
Hmm.
But back in the 70s, that was revolutionary. Well, he was a Scotsman, and he also was a Scotch drinker,
Hmm.
but he also cursed like a banshee. He cursed. The F bomb was every other or every third word that came out of his mouth. And so I decided, I knew that I wasn't going to get these people to ever write a paper on what they talked about. So I decided to record everybody. And then took it to a woman in Gainesville and had her transcribe them. And then I was going to, I did, I sent that to the authors and they could then, edit it and make a paper out of it. And I thought, at least we'll have something. And that's what this book is. It's research needs for a basic science of the system of humanity and nature. Well, I went to pick him up, and she laid in, this woman who was doing the transcribing, laid into me and said, "If you ever bring me anything from that Scotsman again, I will." She was so upset with all of the F words.
Sweet little lady from Gainesville.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine it didn't sit too well.
That we produced in 1982, the Energy and Environment in Florida, the very first edition of that, which eventually became a book. But what we had was NSF money to train high school teachers to teach our stuff.
Mm.
And we brought them in the summertime in a workshop. Teachers are used to doing this. I didn't realize, public school, high school teachers, every summer they can, usually NSF has some workshops all over the states that they can go to learn some new things and become better at teaching certain subjects or whatnot. And we had money to do one of those at in Gainesville. And so we had these teachers come in, taught them how to simulate, taught them how to draw diagrams, and produce this book, Energy Environment in Florida. And the ultimate goal was to produce a textbook for high schools for high school ecology, but it would be a systems book, right?
Mm.
We were very naive, thinking, oh, we just trained all these people and now they could use this book in their science classes. Well, it turns out they have no choice about what book they get to use. The book is the state determines, a bunch of
Right.
people, and
Prescribed.
actually, it turns out now it's a bunch of people in Texas that determine what the hell the books are going to be. But anyway, we did produce the book, and it continues to sell. It's interesting. Energy Environment in Florida. It's a paperback. It's a systems book. I've really wanted to get the copyright back for that, and because it would be a great high school text on systems ecology, and just make it general. Right now, all of the examples are Florida, and it's all Florida, 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 and turn it into a book that is national in scope, or North American in scope, by just taking out the Florida and putting in examples from all different kinds of ecosystems. But the company that has the copyright is not ready or willing to give it up yet. So anyway, that's where we are. 83, he produces Systems Ecology, an introduction. Was John Wiley, 644 pages. That's what people call the Bible. And you've even said this, David, that reading every other sentence is it's unbelievable how penetrating, how concise, how beautiful the prose and the insights. Wouldn't you agree that?
Oh yeah, it's so dense. We used to sit around and think like maybe these are like PhD topics, almost like
Every other
they're
sentence?
send at least every paragraph, because there's just so many
I know.
topics. He's relating it to so many different types of systems, and he takes other people's diagrams and he translates them into his diagrams and shows you both. So there's a lot of that, and just
Yeah.
diagrams galore. You almost always have equations, so it's very quantitative. Very, it's
Yeah.
Incredible.
It's an amazing book. And
So that one has interesting, I guess the title, his original title was Ecological and General Systems, and the publisher, I guess John Wiley
no,
thought,
no, 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 no. His original title was Systems Ecology and Introduction.
ah,
After it was published, he was talking about the second edition, and we were at the center. I remember we were sitting in the big room in the center, and he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "I think you ought to make it systems ecology. I mean, ecological and general systems. I mean, that's after all, that's where it came from. That was your course." And so he changed the name for the second edition to uh,
yeah,
ecological and general systems.
which came out in 94. So you get the second edition 94 or the
Yeah.
original.
I
You
don't
get,
think there was any changes between the two. I never actually sat down page by page comparing
I think
them.
the only thing that's big to me is the Emergy appears between them.
Emoji does appear
So
in
the
it.
Emergy is more prominent in the second
Yeah,
edition.
yeah,
There's like a little preface that
yeah.
tells you about that.
It was also in 1983 where he and Betty went to Austria and were at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis there. And he produced the working paper called Energy Analysis Overview of Nations, which was the template for how to do an analysis of a country. And there was a bunch of countries that were done while they were over there in Austria. Um,
But you can really, so you really trace that back to, I guess, to the New Zealand sabbatical. That's probably where he really tried to,
he began,
right? And then he does I guess the Texas sabbatical, that comes later. But
yeah,
New
that's
Zealand's really where the like Emergy kind of starts to take
right.
the actual templates and form.
Yep. And body energy, foreign trade, welfare of nations, 84. So 84 is a bunch of publications, energy analysis of coastal alternatives, environmental role in agriculture, energy, foreign trade, and the welfare of nations, externality, and the economy of Switzerland. That was with,
Is that the
I had his name.
Senzimir Foundation?
Huh?
That's not the Senzimirs yet, right?
No. Mm-mm.
Uh,
There
No.
was a guy that Godzak Pile, Godzak Pile, I'm pretty sure it was Pile. He was over here for I think a year on sabbatical, and then produced a nice little book with HT on the. He was an economist, and so he was really into externalities and internalities, and,
Mhm.
and so energy externality and the economy of Switzerland. Godzak. 85, self-organization of ecosystems and marine ponds receiving treated sewage. Now that was the report you're talking about, which was work that he did back in the maybe the late 60s, I think, when he was in Chapel Hill.
Yeah.
It had to be in so 20 years later he finally but he did it.
He knew his turnover time was really high. So
In 85, he co-edited with Kathy Ewell the book Cypress Swamps. And some of the people that have been watching these will note that Kathy mentioned something about when we asked her, so how was it working with HT? And so, well, we had disagreements. HT wanted to include everything, and I didn't. So, but that was HT's way. He would always, uh, if you worked on something a little bit, your name went on as a co-author. And if you contributed something, he would figure out some way to put it in there and make it, become part of the
uh,
thing. I remember, so I graduated in 73, in that interim period between 73 and 75, when I went back to get my PhD, Bob Costanza and I were really interested in trying to find an old cracker house and restoring it. And we actually had the possibility of money from the state. I remember that now. They were somewhat interested, and it was the oil overcharge money in 1970s with the Arab oil embargo. Many oil companies gouged the American public by raising their prices, and so then the state's attorneys sued them, and there was this huge bunch of money that all the states got that they had to use on energy initiatives. And so we made a proposal to them to find an old cracker house and show how the old cracker houses were great at energy conservation because they self-cooled themselves, and on and on and on. And we never got the reward. We never got the money. But Odum was so upset that we didn't get the money that he said, "Why don't you just go build one out in the Cypress domes?" And so we actually built a house, a little shack out in the Cypress domes as part of the Cypress projects. I forgot all about that. Uh,
Does it still exist? Do you know?
no, I mean the domes are gone.
Oh,
They cleared them all down,
oh,
and planted pine instead. And 86, Science Man arrives on the scene, and
ah.
they produce a publication, Commonalities Between Hierarchies of Ecosystems and Political Institutions.
Do we pause and say something about Science Man? Like, where did he come from and how did he find Odum? Because I think
Yeah, so
he was
David
a big
Science
figure in the
Man.
90s when I was there in Gainesville.
HD had gone to, I think while he was in New Zealand, he went over to Australia and did a lecture, and I imagine he was invited, to come over. And Science Man evidently, from what I understand, attended that lecture and was very impressed by
Mhm.
HD. And Odum says that after the lecture, I'm back in my hotel. Betty and I are back in the hotel, and there's a knock on the door, and it's this Science Man, or this guy, and he says, "You've got to talk to the prime minister." And he picks up the phone in the hotel room and dials the prime minister, gets him on the phone, and says, "Here," and hands it to HD. To HD. This is what HD told me. He said, the guy has so well connected that he could call the prime minister and get him on the phone, and then he gives it to me. And I don't know what conversation
Yeah.
transpired with the prime minister of New Zealand or anything, but that was his introduction to Science Man. And as Odum often did, I'm sure he invited him to come to Gainesville. And so he, sometime later, he shows up. His real name was David Slade, and the Slade family was very big in the South Pacific as a shipping
Hmm.
family, family that owned a lot of shipping. The P&O, as I understand it. um, when we went to Papua New Guinea as part of the Cousteau stuff, um, Steve Doherty, Steve Doherty went with me, and Science Man gave him a letter and said, "If you need any money while you're down there, you just go to the P&O and hand them this letter, and they'll give you, whatever you want." And he did, actually. Stephen needed some money, and he went to their offices, and they gave him, I don't know, I wasn't privy to how much or anything else, but they gave him some money. Um, so
Right.
Science Man came from this wealthy family. He had a PhD in physics. Um, he changed his name at some point officially in Australia because he believed that there should be a scientific party, just like we have Democrats and Republicans. He felt that there should be a scientific party to represent science in politics, and to move that along, I guess, so to speak. He changed his name and became David Science Man. He always carried a thermometer, and
Oh, I didn't know that.
he said every scientist must have something to measure. To
A,
measure,
ru-
he
a
carried
ruler wouldn't do. Yardstick.
he carried a thermometer. Anyway, a very interesting character. There is in 86, there is a publication called Energy in Ecosystems, ENMERGY. And so it was at this time, 85, 86, when the term emergy was invented.
Uh,
Science Man takes credit for that, saying that he was the originator of emergy. he was the originator of the term emergy, but not of the concept or anything else.
He
And
was
he
very much an etymologist. I remember he was always very into words, and
words,
he loved to
absolutely,
look at the relationship between work and energy and ergo and its Greek roots, and I remember he loved
yeah,
pulling
yeah.
all that together.
Um, and he kept beating on us at the time about you've got to get your nomenclature down. You've got to have the nomenclature, and that's physics. They're really, really strong on good nomenclature. So you can keep track of units when you're multiplying and dividing and doing all that kind of stuff. So he made a great contribution. I had issues with David later on when he kept trying to say that he was the originator of emergy, the whole concept and everything. And I wrote a scathing editorial to ecological modeling, I think, saying, he was an important contributor at the time, but there were many words going around for this concept of energy quality. And one of them was energy. Some editor convinced Odum that that's what he should call it. And so he wrote this paper, Energy and Ecosystems, ENMERGY. And he shook his head as soon as it was published and said, I never should have let him do that. I never should have let him do that. It just clouded the world, the world.
That's one of the first papers I ever saw by Odum was that paper. I don't know
That
how
one.
I found it. I was, just like scrolling around in the book stacks or whatever, and I was
Yeah.
intrigued but had no idea what they were talking about.
Right. Um, and then the first of the Cousteau reports was Energy Systems Overview of the Amazon Basin. So I'm going to say that when he was in Austria in 83, that's when I got the phone call from Richard Murphy with the Cousteau Society. And he called to talk to Odum, and Odum wasn't there. He was on sabbatical. And so Joni said, you should just talk to Mark Brown. I was a postdoc at the time.
Mhm.
And so I get this phone call. And this guy on the other end, very well spoken, says that he was the vice president for science and education with the Cousteau Society. And they just have received a big grant from Ted Turner. They're going to travel around the world on a series, making a series of movies called Rediscovery of the World. And we want some really big scale science done as we go. And how would you like to go?
Mm.
And my first reaction was, is this somebody pulling my leg?
Yeah.
And I said, yeah. How did you hear about me, us? And I'm pretty sure he had said that he had called HT, and Joni told him to call me. And so that was why he was calling me. So it wasn't calling me, he was calling HT. But since I was there and HT wasn't. And I know, and I said, yes, I'm sure we would love to go. Sounds fun. So it turned out to be real. The society, Cousteau Society, was flourishing at the time. They had this big quantity of money. I won't call it a grant necessary, but Ted Turner was funding them. He had the rights to the first showing of anything they produced, and then after that, Cousteau held on to the rights to the movie. So
Mm.
Turner never owned them. Cousteau owned them, but he had the rights to show them, and maybe to show them as many times as he wanted. I don't know. I don't know what the contract was, but prior to that, Odum's Cousteau's eldest son, who was the heir apparent, got killed in an airplane crash, and Jean Michel was the black sheep. Um, I think let me back up and just say Jean Michel and his father didn't get along. So when, as I understand it, when they got this big contract, the family got in touch with Jean-Michel and said, "We would like for you to come back and help with running the society and doing the work on these new movies and everything else." And Jean-Michel said he would, under one condition. Well, I imagine there were more than one, but one of the conditions was that Richard Murphy, who was a PhD in marine biology, would come along and would become the person who checks the science. That because Cousteau had been kind of chided by the scientific community for some of the things that he said over the years in his movies and TV programs and so forth. And Jean-Michel wanted to make sure that the science was good. And he also said that we want to do real science. We want to bring real scientists along that can do science, and not small scale science, but big science. And Murphy was the one that then said, well, it ought to be Odum. And what I figured there, I think maybe we talked about this in the last session, I don't remember, but Scott Nixon was HT's first student, and Jim Kramer was Scott Nixon's student, and Richard Murphy was Jim Kramer's student. And enough of HT went through that circuitous route to Rhode Island, to Southern California, to back, that they called and said, we want you to do to do this. And Odum said, sure. And we went. And the first one that we went on was the Amazon trip. After that, Odum didn't go anymore, and it was just me. And I think mainly he didn't go because of the time commitment. It wasn't something that you could go in for a day or two and then go back. I was there anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 weeks, depending upon the complexity of what we were doing and where we were and so forth. So it was a wonderful, amazing, 8 years or so of traveling around. They gave us money for my travel, totally a graduate student, so a graduate stipend for a graduate student, and the students travel, which was, once we were on with them, there was no, they paid for the food and everything else. It was just plane flights from Gainesville to wherever it was that we were going. Incredible time. Part of the reason, maybe HT wanted to stay on board Calypso when we first arrived, and he had Betty with him. And the Calypso, the society, Cousteau Society, had made a hard and fast rule: no women on the boat.
Oh my gosh.
Because they had gotten into some really bad publicity in the past with the drivers and people, bringing back women and, cavorting on the Calypso, and they couldn't have that. Yeah, they were sailors. And so they had to sleep on shore. And I don't know totally everything that went on, but anyway, I wound up being the go-to, and the thing that I don't think Cousteau ever fully comprehended or really appreciated was that little bit of money enabled us to push energy research really way forward. For 6 years, we had myself and students in HT working on trying to coalesce the methods and terminology and everything else, because we had this little bit of funding. It was practically nothing, but it was really helped out in focusing us on energy and energy research. It was
Yeah,
huge.
because that's where all the like a lot of the early national energy reports
Yeah.
came from that. So there's Ecuador, um,
Brazil, Thailand, Mexico, Mississippi River, Papua New Guinea. else? I guess that's it. Oh, amazing. Anyway, it was,
Oh,
the stories you talk about, I met the king of Thailand. You're not allowed to look at him. Now, so you
yeah.
have to look at the ground. And I peeked a look, but I had a feeling somebody was going to come up and stab me in the back or
You're
something.
giving him a lecture on energy?
No, this was just a meet and greet. That's all it was. But he, so when Odom would go someplace, wherever it was, he would automatically get an audience with the president or the king or the
Hmm.
president or the king or the prime minister, because it was Cousteau. And back in those days, people still knew who Jacques Cousteau was. You ask
Yeah.
people now, and fewer and fewer people remember or even knew of him. Um, and so that was an interesting era. I was really just so heady. I was thinking, man, our stuff, we're gonna insert our stuff into the machine, and it's gonna have a huge impact. And so I can remember, especially the one I remember most was the Mexico, because we did this incredible analysis of the coastal zone of Nayarit, which is a state on the west coast, and how to develop it. We used a kind of McCargish thing where the best places were to develop and not develop, but also socially and economically, how to make the development benefit the people and not just displace them. So I was trying to come up with a way of making these big, because they're huge, these big tourist things, um,
Mm.
not concentrating them all in one place, spreading them out, and forcing the developers to hire locals and give them um, medical treatment and schooling and the whole 9 yards. And Cousteau took our report and bound it in leather, about 4 copies bound in leather with the Cousteau seal on it, and blah, blah, blah. We had this meeting with the president of Mexico and handed over these, and he's saying things like, this is the best thing that's ever happened to Mexico. We're going to use this same technique on every coastal state in the state of in the country of Mexico. And this is going to revolutionize development of our coastal zone. And several months or maybe a year later, he absconded with the treasury to Canada.
Good talker. Yeah.
Big talker. But I began to realize that what's happening here is, yeah, we're inserting at the highest level, but that's not where you insert this kind of information. It will not have an effect whatsoever. What
Hmm.
happens is the president gives it to the vice president, who gives it to a cabinet member, who gives it to the secretary of the interior, who gives it to the undersecretary of the interior, and every one of them says, here, you need this, this is really important stuff. And it finally comes down to some office within the department of the interior, and it's finally given to an intern, and they say, here, read this, and you've got 10 minutes at the next meeting to tell us what's in this.
Wow.
you
Tall
know,
order.
you just have to think about, of course, that's how it happens. These people don't have time to read and to make decisions and to think out of the box. They're just dealing with the stuff that they have to deal with on a daily basis. So that's when we decided, rather than do all of this with the presidents and the kings and everything else, we asked Cousteau and the countries to send us 1 or 2 students for a degree
Mm.
at the University of Florida. And we would teach them our stuff. They'd go back, they would slowly work their way up through the channels and eventually become the head of, the secretary of the interior, hope.
Yeah.
And then change would happen. And then it's not going to be a top down. It's going to be a bottom up. And so that started actually with Mexico. Mexico was the first one that we brought a student. And then there was a student that came from Papua New Guinea.
You
But
remember the student from Mexico? Was that in the, so this was
yes,
the late 80s or early 90s did the students start showing up?
yeah, Zaragoza was his last name.
Okay, I don't think I never met him.
Um,
Yeah,
I
it's all
think it
right.
was, I think it was Zaragoza.
Names are tough to remember sometimes.
So yeah. Anyway, where were we?
But yeah, there's a great story. Do you want to tell the story about chasing whales with the, were you with the stoves when you're chasing whales? Sidebar.
Sidebar. My daughters to this day, and now my granddaughters, tell us the story about the whales. Tell us the story about the whales. We were in the Sea of Cortez and looking for the whales. They winter down there, the northern hemisphere winter. They winter down there, and they calve down there. So the Sea of Cortez is actually the San Andreas Fault. If you follow it up, it goes right through California and comes out at San Francisco, and it's incredibly deep. Very, because it's the fault line. It's just huge, and it has when the winds are blowing half of the year from the west to the east, it has these upwelling zones on the eastern shore of the Sea of Cortez. The Sea of Cortez is also called the Gulf of California, but it's really the Sea of Cortez. But if Trump hears about it, it's going to force everybody to call it the Gulf of California, even though it's not even in California. But so anyway, half of the year there's upwelling on one coast, on the east coast, and the other half it's upwelling on the other because the wind's blowing the other way. It's that deep, so there's these upwelling zones, and the whales concentrate in these upwelling zones. So we were on the west side where the wind was blowing so in that direction, so that there would be all the up. Well, we'd been out there for days, just idling, just sitting there. You can't turn the boat off because it has to run 24/7. So it's idling away and looking and looking. And finally, one day, somebody yells, "Whales, whales!" And so everybody, action, everybody been kind of laying around, just hot and sticky, and jumps in these Zodiac boats. And Murphy and I jump in a boat with a cameraman and a sound man and a driver, I think. And off we go across the water, skipping, and the thing makes incredible noise. And we're just flying to where the whales are. And we get there, no whales. We sit there humming, humming, humming. And all of a sudden the whales are over there. So we start off and we go over there. And we do this for an hour. It seemed like an hour. And after a short period of time, Murphy realizes, and I agree, that there's a pattern. And if you would just sit and be still for a minute, you would figure out what the pattern was. And then you could go to where the whale was and when it was coming up. So it goes down and it comes up, and it goes down and it comes up. And, there was a definite pattern. So Murphy says, just let us out of the boat. Now, the French love that. He's the American scientist. They've always looked down on us Americans. So they're thrilled that these two Americans are getting out in the middle of the Sea of Cortez. You can't see land. You can't see the bottom. It just goes down like that, totally black. Mask, snorkel, fins, and Murphy has a still camera, underwater still camera. And we're paddling, and he says, okay, they're going to come up there. Let's swim. So we start swimming like crazy for that direction. And I'm looking down, and the light just goes and disappears into pure blackness. Swimming along, swimming along, swimming along. And all of a sudden, I see this mouth wide open like this coming up from below. And I'm about to be eaten.
Jonah.
So I eventually grabbed Murphy's fin and so We did not get eaten. They come up like that and they close their mouths and then squirt the water out between their baleen and then lick
Yeah.
the inside of the baleen with their tongue. We were able to get photos, but every one of the photos that Murphy took had his fins in them because he was packing up. uh,
Needed
we
more practice.
Yeah, we did get out of there eventually. They did come back and pick us up, and
You must be the phenomenal swimmer. I think it probably goes back to your early years of swimming in Florida all the time.
oh yeah, I don't think I could come anywhere close to that now.
That's all
Let's see. In '88,
sidebar.
so that one was probably around that time. I don't know exactly when. But in '88, HT did the self-organization transforming the information, the paper in Science, another one that was
Oh,
very,
right. Yeah, that's the
uh,
big
and that was the response to the Crawford Prize in biosciences, which is the equivalent of the Nobel that was shared. He and his brother shared that. Uh, and that was, yeah, in 1987 was the was the prize, and then in '88 the paper was published in Science. They never would have published it except it came from the Crawford Prize, and they figured that, well, I guess they have to, but
right. And he was the sole author on the paper, even though they got the award together, if I
yeah,
remember.
they each had separate papers. I don't know whether Gene ever published a paper other than what he gave over there.
Uh,
Uh, Then Ecological and General Systems, an Introduction to Systems Ecology was published in '94, which was the second edition
right.
of the Bible. In '98, in '96, Environmental Accounting, um,
Hmm.
Energy and Decision Making. And
Which
in
is a
'98,
textbook. I mean, I think the thing about these books is like they had always been his lecture notes, right? These all stem from his classes that he taught.
pretty
That's
much, especially, I remember him handing out environmental accounting in class, and he would always say, "I'll pay you 25 cents for every mistake you find."
I remember there
Nobody,
being two parts, and it was always, and if he updated it, he like changed the colors maybe or something. He, at the printer. Yeah, I think I was amazed that it actually turned into a book. That was just so phenomenal to me just to
yeah,
witness, because you came in when it was still kind of this draft lecture notes book, and then it was a book, and everybody refers to it now, still to this day.
huge. It's amazing what it did.
And there was never a second printing of environmental accounting, but it was probably published. How many prints they made of that? But
I don't know, but it's really expensive right now. I mean, it's over $100 to buy it. It's insane,
yeah,
crazy.
I think I only have one copy.
Yeah. So that was '96 and '98, Environment and Society in Florida, which is the book that was first written for those high school teachers back in the '80s. And then in 2000 was Modeling for All Scales, Introduction to System Simulation that he wrote with Betty.
And again, I think just working on the productivity. I remember he retired in '96 from teaching and from his position as a graduate research professor. And I remember him saying, "Well, I got all these books I got to get out."
Yeah.
Needed more time to write, and he did. That's what he
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. And it was because he retired that I got a position as a faculty member in environmental engineering. They took his, back in the day, when somebody retired, the department held on to that money and they could use it to hire a new faculty member. Shortly after that, the deans all started absconding with the money and saying, we need to allocate our resources college-wide, not just departments,
Yeah.
which was unfair because that would easily decimate a department. If somebody retired and they couldn't hire somebody to replace them, first thing you know, the department doesn't have any faculty. But his salary
Didn't
was,
they hire two people? They
yeah,
hired you, and then they hired somebody.
yeah,
Who
his
was it?
salary was high enough that they could break it in half and hired me and Angela Lindner.
Oh, the green chemistry. Is that
Yeah,
what she is?
yeah,
Or
she was green chemistry,
yeah,
and it was I had to compete for it. I mean, I had to submit my stuff, and they had three finalists, and I had to give, it was. But I was so well known and had such a great track record with numbers of students that had already graduated, and the amount of money that I had brought in over the years, and publications and so forth, it was pretty easy for the faculty to say, yeah. And I was a very known quantity, and I don't think I was very threatening. So
I remember because that's when I was a student, and I remember Bob Knight applying and his interview, but I can't remember who the third person. They probably brought a third person on campus, but I don't
there
remember.
was, and I don't remember now who that was. Yeah. Anyway, I got very fortunate and became there. So
Nice.
that brings us up to where but maybe we've already done it. I don't know. What can I remember most? I think the thing, and I alluded to it the last time, this whole idea of making science, I was just so blown away, even into the 80s and 90s, about what we were doing. I mean, we were making science, we were changing the way science does things, and providing insights that were crucial to understanding humans' place in the environment and whatnot. And it was happening every Thursday afternoon at 4:05, and seminars at the wetland seminar in the noon time. That was when we brought in people from all over campus to give a kind of a formal lecture.
Hmm.
But those Thursday afternoon seminars, and you remember them, I'm sure. There was a long table, and students all sat at one end, and HT sat at one side up at the other end, and I sat opposite him over here. And quite frequently, they would become a conversation between HT and I. He would start off with something, and I go, yeah, and then that, and then this, and then that, and we would go back and forth, and the students were all there. Oh, wow. Oh, and every once in a while we turn and say, well, what do you think? And and so we just, and they were so much fun. I've told people over the years that it reminded me of playing in a sandbox. And there's two ways that you can play in a sandbox. A sandbox, a square box like this.
Hmm.
Two people, you can both be at either end and do your thing all by yourself and look over your shoulder every once in a while to see if he's having more fun than you are. And that's one way of playing. The other way is to come to the middle and build something the two of you could build together and have fun together. And it's always much greater and much bigger than you could ever do separately.
Yeah.
And it's fun, because you're working with somebody that you really like to. And that's the way that Thursday, our relationship, HT's and my relationship, we were playing in the sandbox, and we were playing in the middle of the sandbox together rather than on either side, either end.
I think it's worth remarking, 'cause this goes back to your time, and you said the influence of the architecture, just the physical layout, of this circular, having everybody there in the kind of equal space. And
Yeah.
I remember we always had the chairs conference room for system seminar, but there was one semester there was some kind of conflict and we couldn't have that, or maybe it was just, and we had to take a regular classroom in another building, It was set up as lecture style, and I remember like the first or second seminar. I remember Odum remarking, he's like, he goes, they're not always going to be like this. I don't even remember what the topic was, but it just didn't hit all the cylinders that the
No, you never
having
did.
that that format did, when you're sitting there and there's one person in the front of the room and there's a bunch of people watching them, it's just completely,
It's just not the same. It's not the same at all, you know?
yeah.
And I remember that time, and I think it was even more than one seminar that we were couldn't use that space. Then I think eventually we found something that was more conducive. But yeah, it
Yeah,
was.
they could make changes, right? I think the other thing I always remarked about too was just the number of visitors that came in. There was the Swedes that came in, and of course Science Man was there, and Bernie Patton from the University of Georgia. But then I remember this one guy just flew in, like this guy was a pilot. I don't even remember who the guy was. He's an older gentleman. Flew down from like Boston or somewhere in New England to Gainesville for the day.
I don't
His
remember
own
that.
plane.
Yeah, I don't
I don't
remember.
remember who the guy was though. He had some kind of. I feel like he was like associated with John Todd or something because I remember him talking about ecological design or something.
Okay,
It wasn't
okay.
John Todd. Yeah,
Uh,
a lot of good memories.
yeah. Um,
Well, did you mention too? I mean, I think the last part of the last few years there, he started the folios, right? There's the Emergy folios, and you got three or four
right.
of those out with him as author.
So yeah, HT was a real firm believer in publication, print stuff. And um, I mean, I remember him once saying, you got to print it out. You can't just leave it in, up here in especially when everybody was starting to work on computers and, you had files. And he would say, I don't want a file. I want a hard copy. I want to be able to hold it and see it and to write on it and to edit it and so forth. I mean, he was really big on that. But the folios happened because he was a firm believer in you can't just give the folios were a way of bringing together a compendium of transformities and unit energy values, we call them now, and specific energy. And you can't just give people a table and say, here, you must give them the footnotes and how it's calculated, all of the background information so that they can judge for themselves if it's applicable to um, their particular situation, but just a single number with no background. And so his idea was to develop these folios on a topic and collect from the literature that existed in our group, from all of the theses and dissertations and reports and everything else, the tables and the footnotes, and give full credit to the author that did it. And so he did the first two, the first one, and then I think he and I and Sherry Brant Williams did the second one or something like that. And then I did one, and other people started doing them, but then nobody else picked up on it. So there's four folios, I think.
There's one in agriculture. Of course, he did the first ones on the global processes and
Right.
just had to do the
And
base.
I did one on ecosystems and one on ag. That was Sherry Brant Williams. And then
Well, Eliana Barty, he did that
yeah,
one.
and Kangas, I think Kangas did one on landforms.
Ah,
That
good.
Kangas.
Um, I think the other thing too was, yeah, we started the basically kind of the biennial Emergy
That,
sessions
that
in
started in
2000.
2000.
Right, so he was still there, and I think there was a question in his mind, and maybe I don't know if he was just kind of being modest, but whether or not this was something that was good, good to do or not.
Yeah,
Of course, I thought it was a great idea, and we've carried it on, or you've carried it on,
yeah.
especially.
It's yeah, it was just actually it was Sergio and I was in Italy at the time, probably in 99 or somewhere. I don't think it would have been 98. But anyway, 98 or 99, we were walking up the hill in Porto Venere to the top of the mountain there, I think he said, we ought to do a conference every year. And I said, yeah, what do you mean? And he said, well, we need to bring all of the people doing energy together and have them, talk to each other. Nobody's listening to the other people. And I said, well, that's not a bad idea, but I think we need an energy conference. And so we hatched the idea of having two conferences every other year. So there would be a conference every year, but it would be the energy conference would be every other year, and his energy conference would be every other year in the off years. So there'd be a conference in Italy and then a conference over here the next year, and it would go back and forth like that. And so the first one might have been the advances in energy studies in Porto Venere in Mexico, in Italy, and that was an interesting conference because Chargat was there. Who else? Big names in energy stuff. Oh, Ayers.
Robert Ayers.
Yeah, Robert Ayers and Scubia, Scuibba. Charlie Hall. I don't know. A lot of egotistical people, big egos.
Yeah, the Canadian guy that writes all the books, the energy. He just wrote the book, Vaclav Smil. He was
he was there too.
He was in the first one. He was in the second one, which is the only one I was ever at. But
so there were some very heated presentations and discussions after presentations. And I remember Robert Ayers coming up to me, just red in the face, just screaming about energy quality. What the hell are you guys talking about? You need to hook your wagon to some other star, blah, 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 blah. I didn't know where, Odum once told me, he said, when you get a emotional reaction from somebody, that means that you're questioning a real core belief. And the only way they know how to deal with that is, it's an emotional response. It just,
yeah.
And I saw it with those guys in that meeting I told you about in Gainesville, where they ran me out of the room. And Robert Ayers, he really just laid into me, boy. I remember him saying, "Hook your wagon to a different star." Wow, I couldn't believe it. And Scubia as well, Scuibba, I think his name is.
Right.
I had another big heavy duty conversation with him at those meetings, but they were great in that people had to listen to each other. They don't read each other's papers, but by bringing them together in the same room, they at least had to listen. Now, many of them just flat refused to buy it, but at least they had to listen. Yeah. And the next year was the first Emergy conference, and that was a lot of fun. And again, Odum's influence, he liked the idea of no matter what, produce it as a paper. So we accepted everything that anybody presented, that they were edited and put into the proceedings of the conference. And the whole idea was this was not supposed to be, okay, go lay down. It's the dog. After a while, I can't take it. I lost my train. It was not supposed to be a real finished series of seminars or presentations. This was supposed to be, this is the latest stuff. This is the latest stuff I've been working on. And, here's where I am and the theory that I think. And, it was used that way for a number of years. And it was exciting because that was really fresh off the presses, incredible stuff. And those volumes that we produced are rich and, all kinds of really nice, really interesting stuff that never will make it into journals because it's not that polished, it's not, it hasn't, but it's great, great food and fodder for further research.
That's where he has his universal energy paper. I'm not sure what the title of it was, but where he tries to explain the origins and history of the universe with
Yeah,
systems diagrams.
that is an incredible paper. And Odum, whenever he produced one, he wanted it reviewed. And it was my responsibility to take that paper over to the astronomy department. I got to remember the name of it, but it was essentially it was an energy exploration of the cosmos, of cosmology, essentially.
Hmm.
What are, and he had the hierarchy of all the energies going up, the black holes, which then cycled back down to the dwarf, or whatever the beginning of stars are, and then all the way back up again. So I had to take it over to the astronomy department and find somebody over there to review it for him. And I did. And this guy, I never heard from him, and I would email him and say, how's it going? And so eventually he finally sent me something, and it was scathing. He just said this guy is an idiot and that he doesn't know what he's talking about, and it's elementary bullshit that has been disproved over the, blah, 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 blah. And I never showed it to Odom.
Yeah.
I was embarrassed, but that somebody would, not completely understand or even
Yeah.
come close to
Yeah.
understanding what he had done. So,
To go and check it out. Well, we have covered a lot of territory. That's about 4 decades. We started in 70, 5 decades. Wow. 4 decades. That's right, because we ended in 2000 or so. 2000.
yeah,
You
we
want
always end
to we
with,
can wrap up here, or I don't know if you've got other
I got
stuff.
to, we usually end with, if you had the opportunity, what would you ask him?
Yeah,
And I
that's what I
would
was going to ask
love to
you.
know how he feels about what's happening politically in the world right now. I look at it and I see the struggles of the planet having reached an apex, and um, the change in yields and everything else, economic yields, energy yields, and all the rest, uh,
Hmm.
that are causing people to want less government, want more freedom, want um, take winner take all kind of mentality, as a way of continuing growth, when there is no more growth, um, for many reasons, of poor resource net energies, and but also same energy being divided amongst more and more people means there's less and less for individuals, on and on and on. And um, he wrote The Prosperous Way Down, which I didn't put that in my little
Oh
presentation. I
yeah.
forgot about that. The Prosperous Way Down, which he was really emphatic with, trying to help people see that there was an alternative to a crash, that there could be a way of coming down in a different way, slowly. What I call the misery index. It's the rate of change of things. You're miserable if the rate of change is too great. You're okay if the rate of change is slow enough. So, uh,
Mhm.
but I would love to have conversations now with him about the state of the world, um, economic, energetic, ecological system, because I'm scared, very scared with what the future holds for humanity, in the sense that they're a little bit crazy out there.
But he was, I don't know, he's in some ways he wrote Prosperous Way Down, but he's also the complete optimist,
Yeah,
right? He thinks that people are, at their core, they're adaptive, so they're going to adapt in a meaningful, appropriate way eventually, I guess. Yeah,
yeah. One of the things too that I remember thinking about, and I've thought about a lot, after since he's died, is the sandbox I was talking about wasn't really equal. He was far more brilliant than I'll ever be. And so I was, I was a good sounding board or whatever. He could throw out ideas and I could, munch on them and, and throw back thoughts and everything else. But I know how important it is to have somebody at the same level that you can talk with and create with.
Yeah.
If imagine me trying to talk to my granddaughter about this stuff, you know.
It was like 7 years old, I'm assuming.
Yeah. It's just it doesn't go very far. The conversation just doesn't go there very far. But um,
He must have just, I mean, I never heard him say this outright, but I think just knowing, having been there the amount of time it was near the end of his life, how much he appreciated having you as someone who was right there with him and just could think right along with him and not have to, he
yeah,
doesn't have to pause and explain a whole bunch of stuff and wait for you to get on board. And it really is, there's hardly any friction in the conversation. And I think you're
yeah.
probably, you
It
get to
was
do that for the longest period of time as well, I think. So
it was something. It was we had a wonderful time. I mean, we were making science, and I'm still making science right now. I'm finishing a book that I started 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, I guess. I
you have a
have
title
one
for your book? You have
chapter.
a working title?
Yeah, I do. Let me see here. This is it, by the way.
Oh, wow. I got a paper, printed it out,
Yeah.
or you boxed up your laptop.
No, it's a printout of the. Oh, come on.
And you would say this is it's a lot about Emergy.
It is. It's a follow up, really, to his environmental accounting book, but with that's 96. This is
Yeah.
to roughly 26. So that's 30
30.
years. It's hard to
Oh my
believe.
God.
30 years. All right. The title is Emergy and Environmental Accounting, Coupling Systems of Humanity and Nature.
Nice.
So I have one more chapter to do, which is the final chapter, trying to pull it all together.
Yeah.
And, um,
So you got a dates, publisher, any of that kind of stuff worked out? Or you still working
well, I
on?
had a publisher. I had Springer back in the day, but I never met any of the deadlines. And the guy that was the editor that was looking for it is now since retired or moved on or whatever. So I haven't contacted them yet. But I've been thinking seriously. Well, I could contact Springer. The problem with normal book publishing is the price, the cost to
Yeah.
the consumer. But Springer has this thing called Springer Nature, which is open source, and
Hmm.
the author pays them
Hmm.
X number of dollars. Um, and then it's free to everybody in the world
As a digital copy.
as a digital copy. But they also have a way that they can print it. If somebody wants to buy a hard copy of it,
Yeah.
then there's a charge for printing it, but it's not anywhere near what they would charge if it was
Right.
a printed. And the author in Springer Nature, the author maintains the copyright.
Right.
I kind of like that's kind of nice. So I'm thinking about that, and it's not cheap. I figure based on what I've sort of gleaned from their website and so forth, it's probably between $15,000 and $18,000 for
Ouch.
this damn book. It's gotten pretty big. Um, I've got some money, and I was thinking about starting a GoFundMe site and see
Oh, there you go.
how many people would contribute. Maybe we can put it out. But I really, that's attractive to me just simply because it would be available around the world. And there's so many people that can't afford HT's book even today, you know.
Right.
So
That'd
what's
be
happened
phenomenal.
is that it's become pirated. Somebody has made PDF of it, and so it's traveling slowly around the world as a PDF. Um, it was pirated, but anyway, so that's where I don't know.
So
I
stay
figure
tuned.
I'll get this last chapter done, and then I'll try to find how what I'm going to do next with it. So
Emerging and Environmental Accounting by Mark Brown,
yeah,
digital version. That's more amenable to most people anyway these days. So,
yeah,
uh,
it's got a lot of new stuff. I mean, it's been a lot of fun to focus my entire life for the last year. I've done nothing else but that. That's all I've worked on
right.
almost every day, all day long, to try and finalize it and get it off the monkey off my back. So
Yeah. Looking forward to it. Well, this has been phenomenal. Part two.
part two,
We can do part three,
maybe.
the
If I can think of
2000s,
things to say.
21st millennium.
Yeah,
Um, no, second, third millennium, 21st century. Um, yeah, no, this is great. We appreciate you going back and looking stuff up too and
yeah. Trying
doing
to
your
give a
homework.
chronology to the whole thing.
I think that's really nice because I think what happens in these digital when they're kind of scraping and building AI models, they'll make a transcript of this YouTube when you post it, and all that text will be very useful. So,
Yeah.
and
Well, and one
hopefully
thing that
people will
people
find
ought to know that you have started an AI for Odum and fed it a lot of Odum's work. And what did you call it? Odum Mentor? Or?
I've got Odom Mentor. Yeah, that's one of the first ones I did, and then
Yeah.
since then I've tried a few other ones. I've got HTO Beta.
Oh, really?
I try to do an updated version of it, but they keep increasing the level of the models that you have access to as
Yeah.
well. So it's one of those things that's evolving, but it is I found it very useful and would like to share it with more people. But it is the paid version, unfortunately, so it makes it harder to share unless you're willing to
Yeah.
shell out the.
I have the paid version. Share it with me. I mean, I've got your first version of the Odum one.
Yeah, I tried to make a more streamlined version. That I was trying to make it like maybe sound like more him in style and stuff too. So there's little things you can do to tweak it. And
Really?
it's interesting that they released a new not video, but a new image generating Chat GPT. That's after Dolly 3 is the one that's been around for the last few years. And I gave it a picture of Odom that I think either you or somebody had the other day that sent it. I saw it. It was like Odom sitting on like a stump or something in the
Yeah. Hmm.
forest or something. You give it that image and like, can you recreate this? And it was a pretty good likeness that they recreated of him from that. I was pretty amazed. It's not
Yeah.
perfect, but
Huh.
there's all kinds of crazy things you can do with AI. And I think the thinking and the reasoning part is really coming along. So if you really want to have deeper conversations about
Yeah.
these topics, it's not just for editing your writing, but really as a sounding
Yeah.
board for ideas.
All right. Well,
Good. Well, thank you.
thank you. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, good seeing
I'll
you.
be talking to you soon.